if we shift gears now, from the big company, thousands of engineers, high scale, billions of dollars of revenue, to maybe these small tugboats, captains, small startups. Today, what is the kind of leadership that you see in startups? You've been in some startups yourself, so maybe you can share some of that. But is the DNA of people in startups, particularly in leadership positions, different from the DNA in big companies, or is there a ability to cross-pollinate something between the two?
I won't say DNA is necessarily different, but what I would say is that a startup mentality is different. The mindset is very different, right? And one of the things that stands out is speed. Speed for everything. And by the way, I had my own company. I started back in 80s and I sold it. I went to a startup in late 90s. So I have been through the mode, and it's been a great mode to go through. You learn a lot, and that is one thing that stands out more than anything else. That there is no room for something can wait till tomorrow or a week from now or a month from now. Decision has to be made now, today, maybe in next half an hour or next couple of hours, right? So I think that's what really, and the second thing is that because the companies tend to be very small, people become pretty visibly accountable very quickly, right? People have to carry their weight, and people can see as to what they're doing. There is no option, right? And the third thing I would say is that there is, in smaller companies, you have no politics, right? You can't. Whereas it's not just Cisco, it's large companies have their own, you end up in having a little bit bureaucracy and the politics that sip in. So people end up in spending unnecessary cycles in making the decisions, right? So as long as the startups essentially keep on focusing on execution, basically they end up in delivering.
And surviving.
Yes.
So you mentioned the mindset thing with startups especially, and I've seen smaller startups wanting to achieve the kind of scale that Cisco and the likes of Cisco achieved, and at the same time companies like Cisco want to embrace the agility and the nimbleness of startups. And for people in a bigger company that want to go to a startup, that are considering careers as an employee, or maybe even bootstrap and get into a startup themselves in a leadership position, and they come to you for advice as part of their own decision making process, what's the advice you would give to them?
Something actually I used to tell them even in the normal course, which is true for them to go to startup too, which is embrace speed, simplicity, and agility. If you do that, you'll do great, right? And by the way, it should not be, Cisco has done, when I was there, we had launched something called Alpha Projects as part of internal startups. It has done some great things like that at a larger company. And also, when you look at some of the web companies like Apple's and Microsoft and Google and Facebook and Amazon and Netflix, etc., they actually combine the aspect of startup mentality and moving at speed, right? So they have found, not all the time, but a lot of times they do, right?
Cracked it in a way.
They've cracked exactly. They have cracked it, right? So there are a lot of people who are trying to study these companies, study as to how they operationally manage. And so I used to get some data points on how many different projects Google runs in parallel. For example, how many commits do they do every day? How many millions, tens of millions of test scripts do they run automatically 24/7? And there was more to uplift your teams to say, what can you aspire to, right? So I don't believe that we have to say what startups do versus what big companies do. They're completely in different zones. They're not, right? I mean, you can leverage and learn and adapt for what you need to do.
It's a great way of maybe osmosis, bringing in internally into the company's DNA. For me personally, when I left Cisco and I wanted to do a startup, I went and sounded out a bunch of people who had already made the transition. And one of the CEOs of a company that I ended up having a breakfast meeting with, I asked him, I'm thinking of joining a startup. What is your advice? And his first advice was, go make sure your wife's supportive of you. Make sure she says it's okay, because the family piece he felt was very important.
Absolutely.
And speaking about that, in a way, we are seeing a lot of women entrepreneurs today. And obviously in Cisco's engineering community, had a lot of very strong, technically talented women leaders. What would be the advice you'd give to them if they were to choose to be entrepreneurs? Would that be any different from what you just shared right now?
I don't believe that it will be, for what I just described, would be that much different. They at times end up in having bigger burden on balancing between family and business. I was on board of trustees of Anita Borg Institute for a couple of years, so I know the challenges that women leaders face in technology companies, and they're not going away overnight. But at the same time, I think from the point of view of what we just talked about, in terms of differences between startups and the larger company and how you would adjust, I don't believe that changes just because of the gender change.
That's good to know, and we are seeing that rise.
I mean, there are challenges, by the way, don't get me wrong. I mean, some of the barriers and the hurdles that we talk about in the industry, they're there. And you know what, slowly but surely, people are overcoming them. But what gives me a lot of encouragement is, you and I both have been to Montgomery Summit in March. And Jamie, kudos to him, he has really devoted one entire day to women entrepreneurs, right? And I have attended a whole bunch of sessions. And the energy that I see in those sessions, oh my God. I mean, I have to say, no offense, but I don't see the same level of energy when they are done by men on the other days. I mean, they do an incredible, incredible job. So, there is a lot of positive outcome that I expect from that side.
That's wonderful news, and I see that energy bubbling up in a lot of the tech events. And I have two daughters, and they're kind of being introduced to these as well. We'll see how they turn out. Shifting gears from positive outcomes to maybe negative outcomes, because again, in a startup, the often quoted statistic is 9 out of 10 startups end up failing. And so some end up, treating it as a full stop. Some look at it as a comma, and then use that to become stronger. What are your thoughts on failure? How do you think people in startups should adapt to failure? What are your learnings there?
So failures are part of life, whether you're in a startup or whether you're doing something else. I think if you don't go through a successful journey, you need to sincerely take some quality time off to think through as to what happened, why it happened. And what you find is either sometimes people are too much in love with technology or the product, and people didn't focus as much on the business outcome, for example. They really didn't validate the wonderful ideas that they have with some lighthouse customers, for example. They didn't plan for the burn and the money that they really needed, and they ran out and the runway was too short. They focused on an area which became narrower and narrower in terms of TAM. Competition came from behind and out executed them. Somewhere, one of the major thing, by the way, two things I would say for startup, besides anything else. One is the caliber of the team, by far, who will execute without any of the politics, and really focus on the customers and the business results. I think if you do that, that really helps a long way. I would bring it back to something that we started with, which is, I think in order to have a successful startup, focus on the culture early on.
And the resilience too.
Yeah, because you put that in place, so you can, when the tough time comes, you can bring people back to the culture, what they all believe in, right? And that will help them.
Excellent. So you have been a mentor to several of these startups and obviously across bigger companies. Personally, looking at your own life in the rearview mirror, who has been a source of inspiration for you, either literally or philosophically, who has kind of made you tick?
Well, there are many people, but let me, in the interest of time, I'll focus on a couple. In my personal life, my late mother, and she, as I was growing up, she will always say that, son, remember one thing in life, never stop learning. It doesn't matter how old you get. Because she will say, the day you stop learning, you are done.
That's a very powerful
And
statement.
it's so true. My late wife, and both of them rest in peace. My wife was an extremely courageous young lady. She encouraged me to start my own company, which, by the way, you don't find that common. But, I was only I had been working in the industry for about 10, 11 years, and we were living in Boston at that time, and she said, what's the matter? Quit the job. So here we go. We were in a brand new house. We moved cross country. I didn't know what I was doing. She had a business. She sold a business. We sold a house, and we had a baby on the way. With all of that, we moved, not knowing what the hell we were doing.
She was a woman entrepreneur.
Yeah, she was. Well, she had a couple of businesses, right? So she wanted me to be my own boss forever. And so I have to say that I owe a lot to both the women in my life. And then in professional life, John Chambers has been a tremendous inspiration for me. When I was going through tough time, when my wife was sick, the support that he gave was like your family. I never felt any other way. And there are so many things that I have learned from John, and I work with him today, and I keep on learning. I mean, some of the things that he taught us was really be laser focused on customer success and what's right for customer, how to build very long-term customer relationships, how to build mega accounts, which Cisco did very successfully. Focus on competition, but be laser focused on business outcome. Don't confuse efforts with results, right? I mean, and I can go on and on the number of things that he taught us all and mentored along the way. And I look at him for so many different things. When we are going, and we talk about a bunch of startups, we bounce off a bunch of ideas with each other, and there's a lot I learned from him.
He's as authentic a person as you can ever meet.
Absolutely.
So shifting from the rear view mirror to maybe the windshield, which is perhaps more where the excitement lies. As a technologist over the next 3 to 5 years, maybe more, what are some of the things that you think are exciting or disruptive from a technology standpoint?
There are many, but in the technology areas that I am familiar with and I have worked in, I would say the ones that I am both mentoring, I'm investing, and I'm on board of are in the areas of security. Because I think there is a lot of growth left in security for years to come. Number two, in data and analytics in an enterprise, giant opportunity. And along with that, I would say AI and machine learning go hand in hand because they can really enable to convert the crude into refined oil, which is highly valuable. And I believe that we are barely scratching the surface on AI and ML side. And then last but not the least, I would say in IoT, there is a giant opportunity in IoT, especially Cisco has been predicting, rightfully so, through the VNI and other predictions on number of devices which will be connected by 2020, close to 50 billion. And SoftBank, I saw one of their major forecasts that by 2035, there will be close to 1 trillion devices which will be around the globe, right? Now, there's a big gap between the number of devices and the number of devices which are connected. So even today, there are 20 plus billion devices in the world. Number of devices that are connected are only in tens of millions, right? So, and the gap is actually increasing every single day because there are more coming online and less being connected. So and there are many reasons. We don't have enough time to go into the details as to why. I believe that there is a great opportunity heading our way to really connect and do that. I think when you look at all of this, along with the automation and digitization, and how blockchain, for example, can play some critical roles into all of this, these areas are fascinating, and this is where I get excited about, and I learn something new every day from these young, brilliant brains.
The glint in your eye conveys that excitement.
Thank
on the
you.
board. Perhaps one last question. A lot of these things that you talked about, the innovation, clearly the Silicon Valley has been the hotbed for making a lot of this happen. And the ecosystem here is very strong. But we're now seeing a push for that ecosystem to also be nurtured in other places, and both within the United States as well as globally. So wearing your maybe global hat on, could you touch upon what would it take to replicate the success we have here in maybe India or China or even other parts of United States?
I mean, one of the things which has really made Silicon Valley what it is environment where there is a lot of freedom to innovate. It's easier said than done. I think if you provide that incubation environment, it will go a long way. Proximity to phenomenal schools like Stanford and Berkeley has helped this area. The weather. I mean, you can't beat that, and you can't bring Napa and Tahoe to every corner of the world. But they have their own beauty, and everything has to go along. But there is, besides India and China have been investing, and they have been doing a pretty decent job in creating that. But I'm pretty excited about different parts of the U.S. where this is already in full swing. When I look at places like Austin and Boston and New York have always been there at the forefront, but Austin, RTP, Atlanta, and other places, Salt Lake City, and obviously Seattle and Silicon Valley are pretty much up at the top. It gives me a great reason. I see a lot of enthusiasm and positive environments in places like France, in UK, in Germany, in Eastern Europe. When I visit places like Prague and Krakow and other places, I mean, it gives me a lot of hope and belief that this is going to be a global phenomena and do that. I think there is also a responsibility on shoulders of people in Silicon Valley who have been successful to help others, especially in other areas where they have some ways to catch up. I think one of the things that we can do is to mentor, to coach, to provide some of the time that somebody like me who has an opportunity to do that today. And when I was young, there were a lot of selfless people who helped me along the way without looking for anything in return. So it's my turn, right?
You're paying it forward now.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And so the future looks bright.
The future looks incredibly bright. I'm very excited. I think some of the areas like AI and machine learning and the blockchain, and the robotics automation, these are some exciting area, and we didn't get a chance to talk about healthcare, but I'm learning a little bit at a time. Today I met with a couple of startups in that area, and there are some exciting opportunities coming up where they're bringing technology to healthcare, which is just absolutely exciting for me.
And on that positive note, we will conclude this session. I know we touched upon a lot of things, but I do want to maybe bring you again to go do a deep dive on a few of the things that you talked about. Pankaj, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed this session. And Pankaj is a fountainhead of knowledge, and he can go as broad as or as deep into many of the things that he talked about. We hope you enjoyed this session. I'd like to thank him again, and thank you all for watching this episode of Spotlight.